Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. The biggest challenge Max Verstappen seemingly had today was against his own race engineer rather than any other drivers on track. Lewis Hamilton did though manage to take away the fastest lap point for Max at the end of the Grand Prix, but also was complaining about bouncing, returning to the W14 that plagued of course last year's W13 version with the zero pods on the car. Is this a setup thing that Mercedes are getting wrong with the new updates? Hamilton wants a lot of progress over the summer break. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Before we get into the Grand Prix, did just want to mention quite the quote here from Helmut Marko. And he's not wrong, but it's like the way that he phrases this to Checo Perez. He says, Checo Perez is now woken up from his dream of winning the World Championship. Basically saying that Perez is never going to be a World Champion. Doesn't matter what team you join or who your teammate is, you're just not good enough to do it. And look, it's true, to be honest, it's the harsh reality. And Helmut Marko says, well, that'll help him concentrate on delivering the best performances. And I think Perez now fully knows that it's over. And look, it is what it is. And he's not wrong. But this is the way Red Bull treat their drivers. And there actually has been a rumour as to Perez's replacement for next year in 2024 that Red Bull are lining up. And we'll talk about that at the end of the video because it's early days for that rumour, but it's no doubt a big one. Also on Alpine, Otmar basically confirmed in the paddock that he will be going to a new Formula 1 team and was apparently spotted entering the Aston Martin guest house. Some Aston fans might not be happy about a potential return there, but he did say that his adventure at Alpine has ended and he's going to go to another team. And this was another fantastic quote of the day. Changes take time. I've signed some good people from other teams. They won't join for a couple of years. I always say, you can't get 9 women pregnant and hope to have a baby in a month, this is world class. How have I never heard this quote before? Absolutely fantastic. So I'll just say it again because it's so good. You can't get 9 women pregnant and hope to have a baby in a month. So fantastic from Otmar. But let's talk about the race. There was some, I would say, optimism the race was going to have some rain at some point. I think the races generally are better with that. And there were some decent battles down the field today, but I feel like the result was just, again, a foregone conclusion. Turn 1, Leclerc got away decently well. But the issue is at Spa with the Red Bull behind you, you're a bit of a sitting duck. Now, this is Oscar Piastri on the inside. Hamilton goes to the outside. Sainz then locks up and pushes Piastri into the wall. Now, this is a very debatable incident, and I'm not really sure what my opinion on it is, to be honest. You can see on the far left side, Hamilton is out here, and they're going 3 wide into La Source, and 3 cars don't really go through La Source with the way the corner works. So, Piastri braked relatively early, and it kind of looks like Sainz turned in on him, which I think that he kind of did, and Sainz didn't leave enough room on the inside. And there was a bit more room to be like Sainz probably could have squeezed Hamilton a bit and made room for all 3 of them. But I guess Sainz thought that Piastri wasn't going to send it. But at this point, Piastri, he braked kind of early, but still had too much pace to stop the car. And to be fair, Sainz was the one that kind of locked up going into this corner. So Piastri gets squeezed into the wall, destroys part of Sainz's side pod, but also destroys his own front wing and ends his race. So this is a sad incident really because Verstappen would have won anyway, but it would have been interesting to see Verstappen have to fight past Piastri, fight past Sainz, but those moves were done in a heartbeat because Piastri was quickly out of the race. I feel bad for Oscar, really. As I say, I'm not exactly sure whose fault that I think this is. There was, of course, it was over for Piastri shortly after that, and then Sainz was just getting eaten up by other cars and eventually had to retire the car. And Sainz said after the race, if you want my honest opinion, I think it was a bit optimistic by Oscar to go 3 wide into turn 1, maybe a bit of inexperience. And I think a lot of people would say, and maybe rightfully so, is Sainz really right to talk about this if he kind of did he not just squeeze Oscar into the wall without really seeing he was there? Yes. Could Piastri have taken it a bit more cautiously? Probably also yes. So, racing incident as far as I'm concerned. Intrigued to your thoughts on it in the comment section below. But Perez got the lead against Leclerc going down into Le Com, and Perez kind of needed to do this because he needed to build a gap over Verstappen behind him because Verstappen was always going to come quickly. Verstappen gets the move done on Leclerc a few laps later, and it was some good racing, but I mean, it's DRS overtakes, like they don't exactly make the hair on the back of your neck stand up when these type of things happen. It's more entertaining when it rains. And it took until lap 17 for Verstappen to take the lead. Perez had a decent job, to be fair, but after the pit stop phase, Verstappen decided to put his foot down, got in DRS, and then it was just absolutely over from there. And at that point, it was just about Perez dropped back a long way. I don't think Verstappen's pace advantage over Perez was as severe as it looked. I just think that Perez was maintaining tyres, because at that point, if you're going to get P2 anyway, there's no point pushing hard to try and be within a respectable gap of Verstappen, although it doesn't make you look great, does it? When you're P1 at the end of the Kemmel Straight, your teammate started 6th and yet he still eats you up by like 20 plus seconds. It's not great for Perez, and these were the numbers in terms of the overtakes. As we said a few days ago, the Red Bull DRS effectiveness was back in full force this weekend. Plus 34 kph to Hamilton. Hamilton didn't really try and defend because, frankly, there's no point. I imagine he was just harvesting ERS on the straight here as well, because he could have used his deployment to try and keep Verstappen behind, and he probably would have achieved it. But it would just cost him race time that he doesn't need. When his fight was with Leclerc for the podium position, there was some optimism that it might rain and we might get something of interest, but as it turned out, the slicks just about survived. Some teams made some interesting calls, especially Norris, who went from the mediums to the hards and then to the softs quite early, and still made a very impressive recovery drive, undercutting a load of drivers. At this point in the race as well, to me, the star of the show was Yuki Tsunoda, who had a fantastic race, was really mixing it up with Sainz and Albon, and Gasly eventually came through with a nice couple of overtakes, and Tsunoda finished in P10. But nonetheless, I was really impressed by Yuki today. Hamilton in the Mercedes could never quite get close enough to Leclerc to actually mount a challenge at this point in the Grand Prix, and as we've said before, the only thing going on at the front was Verstappen versus GP as engineer. I mean, like, we had GP telling him, we use a lot of tyre in the outlap, Max, not sure that was a sensible idea, saying, to use your head a bit more. It's just how these two interact, but I mean, this one, just, if this doesn't sum up the season, when do you hear stuff like this from the, reigning world champion and the champion-to-be? I could also push on and do another stop, a little bit of pit stop training for the boys. No, not this time, right? We're not doing what we did in Austria again, because Verstappen wanted to ensure that he got the fastest lap, and I'm sure that there's part of Verstappen that finishes this weekend thinking, damn, I can't believe Lewis stole my lap, like my fastest lap, because I'm sure he wanted all the points. But he didn't get all the points. He won the race. I mean, man, it's incredible what Red Bull are achieving, what Verstappen is achieving, but the dominance is, I'm over it at this point, I think a lot of fans are over it at this point. I will say that congratulations to the Red Bull team that have put this together, because as far as I'm concerned, this will go down as the greatest car ever built in Formula 1. It's just remarkable. I mean, they've won 12 races in a season, and like no other team has done that. And there's another, 10 races to go, and they're probably going to win all of them. Like, it's actually ridiculous. And the reliability nowadays is so good that their car just finishes all the races. Like, there's not even any issues that they run into, which, I'm not saying that the car needs to be less reliable, but back in the day, let's say, the Schumacher days or whatever, there was still the possibility of a car blowing up or some reliability problem that you just don't really get nowadays. Because again, outside of that Sainz-Piastri clash, like, there were no other DNFs. So Hamilton eventually pits, gets the fastest lap, but he didn't have enough to get Leclerc, so he finishes P4. Alonso with a solid Sunday ready to get P5. Then Russell, Norris, as I say, phenomenal stint on the soft to get it P7 in a questionable McLaren race pace, and not a great performance for them given where they've been over the last few races, but expect they might come down to reality a little bit. Tsunoda gets a point, Gasly misses out, Ocon does get a couple though for Alpine, and also with this victory, Max Verstappen equals the record of Fernando Alonso of winning from 9 different grid positions. He'd never won Max from P6 before, now he's won from P6, so he's got to win from P5, P8 and some others if he wants to complete the list of all the top 10, but another side quest for Max Verstappen to manage. But just to talk about this car quickly, look at some of these numbers. 32 seconds over the nearest car. It was 33 seconds in Hungary. I mean, over the nearest next best car that isn't a Red Bull, right? Just absolutely insane. And I think I might have mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, but just put it up again for you guys. And yes, the Red Bull was a monster here last year, and it was always going to be great here. The Mercedes wasn't good here last year at all, and they looked somewhat more promising, to be honest. But the Red Bull 8/10 over Ferrari per lap. I mean, an 8/10 over Mercedes. It's like this, obviously it's Max in part, but I think you can see among the top 4 drivers in the race that Perez is not on the level that Verstappen, Leclerc and Hamilton are operating on. And yet this is the gap. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. And I think we thought and maybe hoped that at this point in the season, they would have closed the gap somewhat the rest of the field, but that does not seem to be the case. Now, Hamilton, if he didn't get penalised in the sprints, would, I believe, have secured P3 in the drivers with that result today, which I think is going to be his goal, really. I think that's what Hamilton said. P3 in the Drivers' Championship is what Hamilton's going to be going for this year, and I think he will get it on current evidence. Toto Wolff says they're on the right path, but Hamilton definitely had his concerns.
Still need to make improvements on the car, but it's just all rear end, and we had bouncing like last year today, so yeah, driving me crazy.
So to be honest, Toto Wolff has been saying Mercedes are on the right path for probably, 18 months at this point, right? But no one can get close to Red Bull. And to be honest, is anyone, based on the race today, you watch that race today, you're like, is anyone going to get close to Red Bull for the next 3 years? And it's just a big question because no one's getting any closer middle of the season. Their advantage, if anything, has been extended over the last couple of races, and they have more to come. They're not done with upgrades just yet. They have more understanding to be gained, and Mercedes is still encountering some issues here, like talking about the bouncing, which I imagine is just probably setup related on the new upgrades they brought. They brought the new rear wing, the new side pod design, some other things as well, and a pretty sizable upgrade. I imagine that Mercedes didn't absolutely maximize what they can get out of the upgrades, and they should be better at Zandvoort theoretically given the way their car is set up, but that's of course after the summer break. But this bouncing was an interesting question from Hamilton. He's like, well, bouncing a bit in the corners on the straights. There was a little bit even on the Ferrari, you could see in the sprint shootout qualifying, where there was a bit of porpoising going on down the straight, and it's a natural aerodynamic phenomenon with these ground effect cars. The teams have obviously dialed most of it out, but if you do run the car absolutely on the ground, you will get these issues, and maybe Mercedes pushed it a bit much in terms of ride height this weekend. Of course, there's some things to figure out. I don't think that the car's going to all of a sudden start porpoising again every weekend like it was at the start of last season, but still, some concerns there for Hamilton, and it's also mainly confidence, right? If the car's bouncing around on the straight and in the corners, your driver isn't going to have the confidence to really push the limits, which is what the Mercedes guys say is what's holding them back the most. It's not necessarily their car is that much slower, it's just the Red Bull is so planted, it's got all the rear end it would ever need. And Hamilton's like, look, I've told the guys what I want, I'm praying for them to deliver it, I'm just waiting until we get it. Whether that's going to be until 2026, I frankly don't know at this point. And Hamilton also mentions the rear end of the car, and it's very clear if you watch the onboards of Hamilton that the rear end is just a lot of the times all over the place, and that's the big issue, because if you're concerned about that part of the car, you can't really push at the limits you could. So the Mercedes might be a lot closer in performance to the Red Bull, it's just the Red Bull is so planted, and if you watch Max's pole lap, the 146.1 or whatever it was on Friday, he basically made no corrections. He wasn't fighting with the car, he was just driving it around the corners and it would live with all of his inputs, which is very rare for a ground effect era car since 2022, and the Mercedes certainly don't have that luxury. But as promised then, just a quick notice here. Now, I don't know how reliable Matthew Thompson is. Aston Martin F1 updates say that he's a reputable BBC UK journalist. I don't know if that's actually true, having looked at his account, but still, he says that next year they will get Fernando Alonso instead of Perez. I think Perez will go. I think I'm more confident than not that they'll get rid of him next year now, but I'm still not sure just because he's got the contract until 2025, or at least until the end of the 2024 season. So Perez maybe will stay, but I think he'll probably go. I don't know who they get instead, but the rumour has it that Fernando Alonso is going to go instead. And apparently, if Otmar goes back to Aston Martin, then Alonso won't want to be there anymore and will therefore jump ship. And apparently it might be to Red Bull, which I will be there for sure if it's Fernando versus Max in the Red Bull, and hopefully it happens, but maybe we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. But it's an early days for this rumour, so yeah, I guess we'll have to stay tuned. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.